Hello, you're welcome to Prep with Chigozie again. And on today's episode, we're going to be looking at the writing section of the IELTS. Yes, this is a new one, so you want to make the most of it. Pull your video closer to you, get your writing pad, and get ready for an interesting write, right? Yes, so I'm sure you're familiar with the fact that the IELTS section of the writing is divided into two tasks. So we have task 1 and task 2. And on the academic IELTS, of course, by the academic IELTS, I mean if you're taking the test for the purpose of further education in other parts of the world. I'm talking about Britain, Canada, Australia, other parts of the world. Right, so you've got the academic IELTS. But then the academic IELTS has two sections, right, as well as the general IELTS, which is of course a requirement for those relocating or those going for work placement and the likes. So on the academic section of the IELTS, right, the task 1 requires you to summarize an image, and this image could be a diagram describing a process, or it could be a bar chart, a pie chart, or a table, right? But today we're focusing primarily on the task 2, which I consider, which is of course generally considered the most important writing test, right? Because it takes 2/3 of your points. Now the task 2 will be an essay. And what do I mean? It means you'll be required to develop a continuous write-up, a coherent write-up discussing whatever issue you're given. And the writing section as well, at this section as well, you may need to know, has different question types. So there are certain question types that require you to talk about advantages and disadvantages of a given issue. Other kinds will require you to talk about your opinion regarding any kind of issue. Other tasks will require you to either agree or disagree with an issue. Some other tasks will ask that you discuss both views of whatever issue, both sides of whatever issue is given. On some other tasks as well, you'll be required to talk about the problems and solution of any phenomenon you're given. Now, on today's episode, we're going to look at the process. We're going to look at the criteria, the grading rubric, the things that are paid attention to, what the examiners are looking to see in your writing to award you a high score. I'm talking about a high score ranging from a 7 to a 7.5 to an 8, right? You know that is pretty achievable. But then these are the things you need to pay attention to. And I would spell out these criteria. Now, in the first place, which of course the most important grading standard is the task achievement. So you want to ask, what is task achievement? Task achievement refers to how well you address the question as directly as possible. Now, this is a trap you're bound to fall into. In other words, you're bound to not achieve full task achievement if you don't understand the question, if you don't fully understand the question, which is why in my classes I would often emphasize the first thing you want to do is take some time to understand the question. Now, some students are often given into the temptation that, oh, I don't have so much time to write, why not just jump into the writing? No, that is rather counterproductive, because you may end up answering a different question in the mind that you are answering the question given to you on the test. So to surmount this challenge of course achieving full task response is that you understand the question, right? And on the grading rubric here I have from British Council for a task 8, task achievement is so that the response covers all the requirements of the task appropriately, relevantly, and sufficiently. In other words, you're addressing the question using the required examples that are relevant for that issue of discussion, and of course you are able to give sufficient example to address all parts of the tasks, right? Also, on the academic parts, for example, the key features are skillfully selected and clearly presented, highlighted and illustrated. You want to ask, what are key features? These are simply the essential parts of the question. So on task achievement, you want to be sure that you address all key features sufficiently and as clearly as possible, right? So I hope you understand what it means by task achievement. It is otherwise known as task response, by the way. How fully, sufficiently you address all parts of the question given to you. And I will mention again that this is largely hinged on how well you understand the question. So you want to know 2, Coherence and cohesion. What is this referring to? The examiners are looking out for your ability to consistently develop an argument, especially your side of the argument, consistently with good connectors. Good connectors that take us seamlessly from the introduction to the body paragraphs to the conclusion. And then your argument must be as clear as possible. Now, this is where you want to be sure that the vocabulary and the word choice you're employing are relevant to the given topic. You don't want to plug in a lot of big vocabulary and end up not achieving coherence, clarity of thought. Remember, the IELTS testing, for all of the sections, in fact, the IELTS is more or less asking for your ability to communicate and comprehend. And on the writing, you're tested for your ability to essentially do what? Communicate. And where you have too much vocabulary, big vocabulary in your writing, you lose your ability to communicate, right? Council band has to say about a coherence and cohesion, especially for a band 8 and band 9. Remember, we are targeting the high score possible, right? So we're looking at band 8 and band 9 descriptions of all of these criteria. Now, number 8, for band 8, rather, we have the message can be followed with ease. See, ideas are logically sequenced, and cohesion is well managed. Like cohesion is well managed. How you move from one point to the other with your, of course, sufficient use of, I wouldn't say sufficient use of transitions, because that could be confused for redundant use of transitions. So you don't necessarily have to use firstly, secondly, furthermore, for example, all the time in your writing. It makes it pretty obvious to the examiner, and they don't come off as naturally as you would expect of a writing that, of course, whose aim is communication. Right? That does not mean that you don't have to explore transitions. You should explore transitions, but relevantly and appropriately. Paragraph should contain certain information, which we will soon see. Your body paragraph is meant to contain certain information as well. Your concluded paragraph is meant to contain specific information, right? So they want to see that all of these are well presented from beginning till the end to achieve a high band as far as coherence and cohesion is concerned. Number 3, they're looking out for lexical resources. Now, what, of course, are lexical resources? This is more or less your vocabulary, the versatility of your word choices. So I would often advise my students that do not be so hung up on trying to ensure that you don't repeat words to the extent that you don't fully address all parts of the essay before your time runs out. Because lexical resources, of course, requires that you explore a variety of word choices, a variety of vocabulary. And advisably, you don't want to be found repeating the exact words used in the question. However, because the time-based test, and of course, when you take into account the fact that it is a spontaneous writing, and when you take into account the tense environment of the exam, you may want to be too careful. You can't be too careful, rather. You can't be too careful to not repeat words. If you must repeat words, right, you should. It is better to repeat certain words than having to rephrase them to the extent that the meaning in the given context, the meaning in the question is lost. So I would often encourage write as much as you can. Then at the end of the writing, you want to give yourself about 5 minutes to review your writing. That is where you get to employ synonyms, where, of course, for familiar words, you could easily employ synonyms on. On the task 8 part, when it comes to lexical resources here, we have that a wide resources and 9 on lexical resources. You're looking at full flexibility and precise use are evident within the scope of the task. Precise use of word choices, not unnecessary use of word choices. So if you must use a few uncommon vocabulary, right, ensure that they are relevant to the task. And finally, grammatical range and accuracy. This is something that many students overlook, which is of course very, very important. You want to ensure that your grammar is correct. When we're talking about grammar, we're talking about punctuation, we're talking about subject-verb agreement, we're talking about your tenses, we're talking about consistency in your verb usage. And of course, if you're employing complex sentence structures, you want to ensure that your punctuations are used where they are meant to be used. right? For a band 8 on the British Council band description, I have a wide range of structures within the scope of the task is flexibly and accurately used. So you don't want to be found using simple sentences all through your essay. You want to play around simple, complex, compound sentences correctly used with good punctuation marks. The majority of sentences are error-free, so you want to be sure, although it is almost impossible to not have errors entirely. It is almost impossible to have that on a time-based test, of course, given the atmosphere of the exam, right? But you want to ensure that the errors are as minimal as can be so they don't affect your points. Ask response, which of course entails your ability to understand the question so that you address all relevant parts. Number 2, coherence and cohesion, development of ideas from beginning to the end. How consistently did you develop your ideas, and did you use your connectors naturally and relevantly, not redundantly? Lexical resources explore a wide range of word choices. In any case, you don't want to be hung up on ensuring that you use synonyms, especially when they may not be necessary, or when they may change the entire meaning. It is better to repeat certain words once or twice than having to use synonyms that do not accurately capture the meaning of the word. If you're not sure about a synonym for a word, it is better to keep it safe by just repeating that word. Grammatical range and accuracy, explore sentence structures, and whilst doing that, you want to ensure that your verbs often agree with the subjects in number. Your use of verb tenses, of course, is consistent. You want to also look out for your punctuation marks. Your commas, your full stop, the semicolon should be used appropriately. So I hope this has accurately or clearly broken down all the things you should pay attention to as you practice for your IELTS writing task. Okay, if you enjoyed this, you want to of course leave a like and feel free to share so that others preparing for the same test as you would have this luxury at their beck and call. So until I come your way next time, of course I expect that the next time you see me here, I'll more or less be exemplifying all I have said so far with sample writings that are high band scoring. Until then, keep practicing, and I wish you the very best in your test.